Helps.
Hello and welcome to another episode of this special episode, actually, of Back Nine Report. This special Ryder Cup episode. We are really happy to have two of our really good friends, Mike May and our European golf guru, Kieran Clark, with us today to break down the teams, give tips on what to watch for this weekend at the 44th Ryder Cup from Italy. Kieran, welcome back to the show. How are things in Scotland for you, buddy?
I'm fantastic, Fred. And actually, believe it or not, it's been a beautiful day here in St. Andrews. The sun was shining. But now, Fred, given you've had some St. Andrews experience, you'll not be shocked when I tell you it's a bit windy today, but it is dry and
No,
bright.
no. It's always a beautiful day in Scotland, right?
Of course it is. Thank you.
It's
You're quite right.
exactly. Hey, Mike, I want to ask you the same question. You know, we're going to the Ryder Cup this weekend. You've been traveling. You've been traveling all over. You've been to Canada. You've been to Portland, Cincinnati, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Gulf Shores. What's it like sleeping in your own bed?
Well, the big joke in my neighborhood is guess who was coming out of Mike May's house? Mike May. So it's always nice getting home.
You have been on the track. Hey, Mike, let me ask you a real quick question here. This weekend with the Ryder Cup, what are you looking forward to the most?
I'm looking forward to finding out whether we're going to go foursomes first or four balls. I tend to think foursomes. And who is Zach Johnson going to put out first? Who's going to hit that opening tee shot like Lexi Thompson did for the American team last week in the Solheim Cup?
Here I'm going to ask you the same question.
Well, I mean, for me, it's just the Ryder Cup, which I think to me it's the purest event we have in golf. It's the purest sporting event. I mean, so much about golf now is about the money and the FedEx Cup points and whatever they call the Live Golf prize funds. But this is about something a bit purer. It's about your teammates, your country, your continent, your tour. You can break it down however you want. And to me, it's kind of sport at its purest. It's about kind of what it's supposed to be about. And I think it's something to celebrate. The Solheim Cup last weekend was obviously a brilliant event, fantastic. The Ryder Cup was a real hard act to follow. So I'm looking forward to just the event itself. And hopefully this time, Fred, actually is a little bit closer because if you really think about it, in the past sort of 10 years or so, the Ryder Cups have been quite one-sided for the home team. So hopefully this time, at the very least, we get a nail-biting, edge-of-the-seat thriller because the Solheim Cup has been winning that race recently.
So let's just give a little background here. There are 12 players on each team. 6 of those qualified automatically over the past 2 years, while another 6 on each team were captain's picks. And some of those were quite controversial. Qualifying automatically for the Americans, Scotty Scheffler, Wyndham Clark, Brian Harman, Patrick Cantlay, Max Homa, and Xander Schauffele. And then Captain Zach Johnson picked Brooks Koepka, who was a little bit of a surprise because he's from the LIV, Jordan Spieth, Cam Young, Colin Morikawa, Ricky Fowler, and Justin Thomas. A couple of those were a little surprising. Mike, Captain Johnson jumped over a couple of guys, namely Keegan Bradley and Lucas Glover, to pick Fowler and Justin Thomas. What do you think of Captain Zach Johnson's 6 picks?
Well, I like all of them with the exception of Justin Thomas, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because JT has performed well in the past, especially as a partner with Jordan Spieth. He's obviously one of the world's greatest players. This year was an off year for JT, but you got to feel sorry for Lucas Glover, who's sort of coming to the end of his regular tour career, and for him to have those 2 late season wins and not be given a spot is tough luck. But again, if we win convincingly, then Jack Johnson was correct. If not, then hindsight's 2020. You probably should have picked Keegan Bradley or Lucas.
Here on the European side, you had automatic qualifiers with Rory McIlroy, Victor Hovland, John Rahm, all who had fantastic years. Tyrrell Hatton, Matt Fitzpatrick, and Robert McIntyre, your buddy there from Scotland. Yep. The captain's picks were Ludwig Aberg, which is a little controversial, Tommy Fleetwood, Nikolai Hojgaard, Shane Lowry, Justin Rose, and Sepp Straka. Ask you the same question, Kieran. What do you think of these picks, especially the captain's picks?
I think, well, first of all, the automatic qualifiers are very strong, obviously, as you say there, Fred. And I think the picks from Luke Donald were actually mostly predictable. I think the most controversial one was obviously, I think, actually Shane Lowry, who has shown not much form this year, but he's a major champion. He's played the Ryder Cup before. And
maybe
actually,
Shane Lowry and Justin Thomas can play together. You know,
that said, though, Fred, literally after he was picked, Shane Lowry finished 3rd at the Irish Open. So he kind of basically silenced his critics right there. Nikolai Hojgaard as well. maybe a bit debatable there. Ludwig Aberg, though, I think was absolutely guaranteed to be on the team because he's a really sensational talent. Luke Donald said when he played golf with him actually in the summer, he said he's the most impressive player he's played with since Rory McIlroy back in 2008 as a young player. And he's a real kind of generational talent. Obviously, already won on the DP World Tour at Cran-Cercier and the European Masters, and did very well at Wentworth. Had a bad last day there, but very talented player. One of those kind of players who can really, really shine on the big occasion, I think. So I think the European team is really strong, and I think Sepp Straka makes a lot of birdies, really underrated player, and then kind of the experienced heads in Rose and Fleetwood. So I think the European team is very well balanced in terms of youth and experience. Obviously, a lot of new players, a lot of new pairings this week it will be as well. So a lot of questions for Luke Donald to answer. But I do think the ingredients he has are there to make a very appetizing Italian dish in Rome.
Kieran, staying with the European team, Luke Donald was kind of named last minute as a substitute for Henrik Stenson, who was originally named as a European captain, but lost that job when he switched his allegiance away from the DP World Tour and went to the LIV. What do you think about what Luke Donald's done so far, and what do you think about kind of coming into late moment there to take over?
Obviously, a very unprecedented situation to deal with. I think Luke Donald, I mean, you guys have watched golf for a long time, Luke's a very calm, very intelligent, level-headed kind of person. So he's kind of the right kind of player to bring into that environment as a personality. He's very smart. And I think he will have done his homework in every possible way for this week. I think he's a very, very cool-headed captain. And I think he's the kind of captain who we perhaps underestimate because we tend to think about the big personalities. But I think you look at the last 20 years for Europe, kind of the best captains were the kind of understated guys like Paul McGinley, like Bernhard Langer back in 2004. And I think Luke Donald, who has literally a 100% winning record in the Ryder Cup, he's never lost a Ryder Cup he's been involved in. I think he was a great choice, and I think he will do a very good job. Obviously, the Ryder Cup captaincy, so much of it is about luck and your players doing well and this timing working out for you. And obviously, if you win, you're great. If you lose, you're not. It's a bit harsh in that sense. But I think Luke Donald will create the environment necessary to give his players the best chance to go out there and play very well. So I think he'll do a very good job. And it's now down to the players to go out there and perform, which the players didn't do 2 years ago at Whistling Straits. Now, a lot of these guys, like Rory, like John Ram, like Victor Hovland, they've got a point to prove this week.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, the three guys you just mentioned, I mean, they are at the top of the game. They are three of the absolute best players right today. So I'll look for them to have big weeks. But Mike, I want to get back here to this point. Brooks Koepka was named as a captain's pick. He was runner-up at the Masters. He won the PGA. The LIV has had an effect on both teams, but what do you think about what effect maybe the LIV has had on the American Ryder Cup team?
I think ever since we had that announcement back in June that indicated there'll be some type of compromise, merger, coming together of the two tours, I think that's taken some of the sharpness out of the issue, and people aren't so territorial as they were prior to the June announcement. Of course, more details are yet to come. If we had not picked Koepka, the reigning PGA champion, and of course, years and years ago, the PGA champion in the year of the Ryder Cup was an automatic selection for this team. So I think the Europeans would have looked at the Americans going, "You're silly people. You should have picked one of the best players in the world." And Zach Johnson did. And Koepka will bring, he's a horse for any course, and he can play with McIlroy and Rahm and all those thoroughbreds on the European team.
Kieran, one of the players from Europe who've not been too happy that they weren't included in the European Ryder Cup team, Sergio, feels a little slighted because he hasn't been able to compete in this.
Well, unfortunately, he wasn't eligible because he gave up his European Tour membership, which is part of the criteria to be on the European team. That doesn't
matter to Sergio, though. He's Sergio. He gets to set his own rules. Right?
Well, Sergio did try and get back into it by offering to pay a huge fine of $700,000 and lots of concessions. But Keith Pelley, the European Tour CEO, said to him, no chance. I think when it comes to live golf and the impact it's had on the European team, Fred, to kind of take Mike's question there, I think the difference for the European team is it's perhaps more impacted the Europeans in terms of the future captains. So we think about the guys who are missing from last time. It's Westwood, Poulter, Garcia, Casey. 4 players, all north of 40. Certainly in Westwood, Poulter, and Casey's case, they would not be anywhere near the team this year. Garcia, again, has such a great Ryder Cup record. Maybe he would have been in there to partner John Ram again. Who knows? But in terms of captains, obviously, all those guys would have been future captains for the European team, 100% guaranteed. Obviously, Henrik Stenson as well, maybe Martin Keimer. And all these guys are now in live. And now the question is, will they come back into the fold in the years to come for next time and the times beyond that? And that's a big unanswered question, because obviously, as Mike said, we have still have great uncertainty about what this merger coming together will even be. Will it actually even happen? And what form will it take? Will we ever see Sergio as a European captain, or Lee Westwood as a European captain, or even Poulter? We don't know. I generally think, though, that the players have a lot to say about this. I think if the likes of John Ram and Rory McIlroy, the big hitters in the European team, if they say, you know what, let bygones be bygones. I want Sergio to be captain at Bethpage Black, or I want Lee West to be captain 2 years after that. I think they'll find some way of making that happen. But obviously, right now, that's completely uncertain. But certainly, in terms of the European side, the team they have right now is very fresh, and it had to be anyway, because I think last time out at Whistling Straits, that was a European team with a lot of players who are right at the end of their time. It was time to move on, time to refresh themselves, and they've done that. But as I say, the leadership side of it, that's the question for the Europeans to answer, not just this year, but certainly in the years to come.
Mike, I want to touch on one more thing about the American team. You mentioned it earlier, Lucas Glover was overlooked, even though he won the last event of the year and the first FedEx playoff event back to back, and did very well actually through the playoffs. Had a career year, one of the hottest players. One of the reasons for the 6 picks was to pick the hottest players going. Lucas Glover was certainly one of those, and Zach Johnson overlooked him. How should Keegan Bradley and Lucas Glover feel about kind of the slight that they receive from Zach Johnson?
Well, they're not the only ones who have been slighted. This happens a lot when it comes to a subjective pick, and it's not like Zach Johnson picked 6 bad golfers. He just picked one golfer who was not in form, but it had a, in all to JT's credit, he has done well in these team events, President's Cup and Ryder's Cup. He is one of the world's greatest players. So on paper, JT deserves to be there. But of course, in recent form, Keegan Bradley and Lucas Glover and probably a few others would have liked to maybe, and I'm not sure if there was a phone call from Zach Johnson, those guys or not, but that's just the nature of the beast. We only have 12 players, and there's always going to be a 13th or 14th player who's disappointed. Let's wait and see what happens. Obviously, the main reason we get this later that JT was picked is because of his camaraderie and his successful partnership with Jordan Spieth. And if those two are not together, then why is Justin Thomas on this team?
Yep, good point. Hey, we should mention that there are 5 sessions in the Ryder Cup, a total of 28 points up for grabs. Each of the first 2 days includes one foursome match and one 4-ball match. The final day is reserved for 12 singles matches. Each match is worth 1 point, with matches ending a draw, a half point for each side. It takes 14.5 points to win the cup, or in the American side right now, 14 points would retain. It would be officially a tie, but they would retain. We just saw that in the Solheim Cup, actually. The team matches, which include 16 points in all, have always been a strong point for the Europeans, who seem to do very well, especially in foursomes. Plus, if you have a player who is not playing well right now, there are only 4 players that can sit out every team match. So the captains can rest players or move players around. So it becomes, the Ryder Cup is a little more strategical than the President's Cup, because everybody plays the President's Cup. In the Ryder Cup, you can kind of sit guys and see who's playing the best. Let's talk a little bit about teams and possible teams. Kieran, who do you see as potential teams for the Euros? Who would you pair with Victor, Rory, and Rahm?
Well, I mean, I did read that Mike has come prepared with his homework. He has his pairings ready to show us, and I have done exactly the same in response to that. So I have got my pairings out for Friday morning. Now, the question is, I really don't know, because I think what's intriguing about this European team, though, Fred, is the fact that there's so many new players in there, and a lot of the established players in there previously had partners they would be paired up with, like Ram and Garcia. That can't happen this time. Who's Ram going to go with? Who's Rory going to go with? So all these, we have a lot of fresh pairings this year. There's not much evidence in history to kind of back us up here. But I'm going to say that the opening session on Friday is foursomes. And I'm going to say that the four, I'm going to think they're going to go for a very strong team at the start. Europeans going to get out there strong because obviously last time they fell behind early and it only got worse from there. And I think this time they'll want to get ahead early and try and build that momentum, try and build that confidence, try and stretch their lead ahead of the Americans session by session. So I think they'll go very strong with their four pairings on Friday morning. And I see actually all 8 players being the experienced players. I don't see any rookies starting on Friday. I think you'll see McIlroy go out with Victor Hovland as the first game as a foursome.
Wow, wow.
Then, which will be, that's a really tough team to beat right
That's
there.
almost like Tiger and Phil together, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but these guys like each other though. That's the difference. You know,
that's a difference.
It's a big difference, Fred. You know,
Yeah.
so, and then I think you'll see John Ram being paired with Tyrrell Hatton, 2 firecracker players right there.
We could have an explosion.
Yeah, there'll be a seismic explosion right there in Rome. Then I think you'll see a more subdued pairing in Tommy Fleetwood and Shane Lowry. Again, 2 very solid players right there. They actually played together earlier this year in the Hero Cup that they had in the European Tour earlier this year back in the spring. And I think those 2 will play together again. And then the 4th pairing I'm going to put out there on Friday morning will be Justin Rose, the veteran of the team, alongside Matt Fitzpatrick, who US Open champion, winner on the PGA Tour and European Tour, but he's yet to win any points in the Ryder Cup. So I think that will be the 4 going out on Friday morning. 4 very strong pairings, very experienced pairings. And, you know, Mike, I think your guys might struggle on the Friday morning against that team.
So we shall see.
Mike, same question. You know, we always know with the Americans right now, we've got Cantlay and Schauffele, the pair together. We've got Spieth and Thomas, and probably Thomas was picked because Jordan went to Zach and said, "Hey, I need Justin for my partner. You got to bring him in here." Who else do you see pairing up, like with Scheffler or Brian Harman? Ricky Fowler seems like he would be a good pick for either foursomes or 4-ball. What are your thoughts?
Well, I definitely agree that Spieth will be with Justin Thomas. And one final thought about Justin Thomas, to his credit, he did play in the last event, most recently in California. I believe he got a top 15. So he's beginning to trend in the right direction. He had 4 solid rounds, so maybe he's just rising to the top at the right time. But I go JT and Spieth, Cantlay and Schauffele. They've been well together. You're not going to break that pairing up. Now the other 8 players, I'm going to put Koepka with Clark, 2 U.S. Open champions. I'm going to put Brian Harman with Morikawa, 2 Open Championship champions. Again, with Harman, rookie, Morikawa, veteran, Fowler, veteran with Homa. You got the experience in the rookie. And then I put Scotty Scheffler with Cam Young. Those are my 6. You can put those 6 groups out, but I think you're going to start with Koepka and Clark, and Koepka's going to hit the first tee shot in foursomes, followed by Cantlay, Schauffele, and then you've got Scheffler and Cam Young. And then finally, you have JT out there with Jordan Spieth. They'll be the last group on Friday, giving JT a chance to just sort of let it acclimatize. You're going to be out there in the afternoon. We'll see. But I would not be surprised if the Europeans play the 4 that Kieran just said and put those same 8 players out on Friday afternoon. Luke Donald's going to ride those horses till they just run out of gas, because he doesn't have the depth that Zach Johnson does, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right about that, Mike. I think the Europeans have to have at least a 2 or 3 point lead when they hit Sunday for the singles, because I think the American team is probably a little bit deeper top to bottom. Let's talk just a little bit about history. Those are great. Those are great, guys. That was perfect, actually. Since 1995, there have been 13 Ryder Cups held, and the Europeans have won 9 of those. However, Team USA is coming off one of its best ever showings at Whistling Straits that Kieran referred to earlier, when they posted a 19-9 win. That's a rout. Mike, the biggest question to me heading into this year's contest is, can the U.S. team keep that momentum from Wisconsin and win in Europe, in Italy?
I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I think they will. Again, these rookies are seasoned golf professionals, but of course, even Brooks Koepka made the comment a few weeks ago that the most nervous he's ever been or ever is when he's in the Ryder Cup. And if he admits that he gets a little nervous, then I think they all do. But if you're just like Karen Stuffle said yesterday toward the end of the Solheim Cup, late in the round, if you're not sweating, you're not living. And so this is a very tense, pressure-packed field moment, and it's a big deal for the crowd, the players on both sides, and the captain. So it's a matter of who's got the the guts to pull up the shot and just breathe, relax, and play the way they know how to play.
Kieran, was that U.S. win 2 years ago an anomaly at Whistling Straits? What can the Euros do maybe differently this time to win the cup back? Mike said that he's going to ride his veterans. What do you think?
Well, I don't think the US winning was an anomaly. I think the margin was an anomaly. I don't see that happening again. I think the European team is stronger this time, top to bottom, than it was 2 years ago. And I don't think the US team is quite at that same level. I think it's a very strong team, but I don't think some of the players are playing quite as well as they were 2 years ago. And by that I mean Spieth, Thomas, Cantlay, Schauffele. They're not quite level they were 2 years ago. And obviously, there's no Dustin Johnson here, who's playing great 2 years ago, and so on. So I think they're a very strong team, but it's not quite, the margins aren't quite there as they were before. But I touched on it earlier, Fred, where home advantage is huge in this. Europe have only lost one time in the last 42 years at home, and that was back in '93. The US have won 3 of the last 4 on home soil, and they really should have won at Medina as well. So it seems that home advantage is really critical in the Ryder Cup. So I expect Europe to be really strong this week. I think it'll be very close. I think it could be within 2 or 3 points come the end of the thing altogether. And on Mike's point about the kind of the seasoned horses for the European team, I do think there are some kind of outliers, though. I think 2 of the rookies I'm most intrigued by for Europe are, one, certainly Ludwig Aberg. I think he's someone who has a real X factor to him, and he'll be out on Friday afternoon, potentially very explosive in 4 balls. And the other guy I think is going to be the real kind of underrated player is actually Sepp Straka, who is a fantastic golfer, very streaky. When he gets going, he can do anything. He's a very explosive player, and I think you get him out in 4 balls, I think he could do a lot of damage. The 2 kind of weak links for Europe are probably Højgaard and McIntyre. But again, as you touched on earlier, Fred, you can kind of hide players in this format in the team matches. Not to name drop, but I was talking to Tony Jacklin last week just about this, and he made that comparison where the big difference for him when he became European captain was you could hide some players. Whereas in the President's Cup, like you say, Fred, it's basically everyone's out all the time, and the best team, which is invariably the Americans, will win head to head. But this is a bit different, a bit more strategic. And I think Europe have a lot of interesting combinations. They have home advantage. I think that's a big equalizer. I think the Americans could certainly win here, no doubt about that. But I certainly do not see a rout either way. I think this will be really tight, very, very tense, hopefully enthralling, because as I say, really since Medina, it's been quite one-sided in the favor of whatever home team it is. Whereas you compare it go back to the 90s, for example, in the late 80s, where the Ryder Cup was like knife edge every single time. The last 10 years, not so much. I don't really care who wins because I don't really root for teams or any side. I just want a great spectacle, and hopefully we get that and get a really tight, tense match, just like what we saw at the Solheim Cup, but maybe this time with an outright winner.
Guys, there's going to be a lot of ways to watch this thing. The 44th Ryder Cup will be broadcast in 201 countries around the world, with a possible audience of 623 million households. What is that 30-second commercial like, to have that kind of access? Sky Sports will once again be the home of the Ryder Cup for the UK. Coverage starting from Monday, today. We've got in the US, you've got NBC and the Golf Channel doing everything. You can also watch feature groups at rydercup.com or on the Ryder Cup app. So there's a lot of different ways to watch this thing. They've got everything covered. This promises to be one of the most sophisticated broadcast operations in Ryder Cup history. And so it's really coverage around the world and to be seen everywhere. So guys, we're going to run out of time here. Kieran, I'm going to ask you for 30 seconds, final thoughts to wrap this thing up.
Well, first of all, a pleasure to be with you both for this conversation. And again, hopefully the Ryder Cup delivers a spectacle, because when you get it tight, when you get it close, when it's on a knife edge, I think it is by far, team match play is the best format for golf to watch. I think it's the most exciting format for golf. And if we get that kind of spectacle this week, then it'll be one to remember. We're certainly due one of those again. Obviously, European team, I guess I'd like them to win, I suppose, but I just want a great match. It played in great spirit, some great golf. And if we get that, then I'll be happy.
Mike, your final thoughts.
I think right now we can speculate who's the best and who's the favorite. But when it comes down to when they start the matches, I think that home field advantage that the Europeans have and the excitement will just narrow the field, and it's going to be it's going to come down to Sunday afternoon, the last 2 or 3 groups, as it usually has in the past, and I think it will this year. The Europeans will deliver, even though there are a lot of names we don't recognize. They'll play well, and they're on that team for a reason. And let's hope Justin Thomas supports Zach Johnson's choice.
Guys, this is outstanding content. Thank you both so much for coming on and talking about the Ryder Cup with me. Really appreciate it. Guys, enjoy the coverage this weekend, and we're going to root. We're just going to root for a good show. Thank you.
Yes, exactly.